3 weeks into the job, and I still hadn't gotten used to the silence. Shiverhill didn't hum with activity the way I thought nursing homes would. No shuffle of feet down the hallway. No laughter from televisions behind half-open doors. Just the constant buzz of fluorescent lights and the soft, rhythmic hum of machines keeping time with lives that had mostly stopped moving forward. The air always smelled faintly of antiseptic and something softer, like baby powder over something that had started to decay. You get used to that, eventually. You learn to separate scent from sensation. You learn which smells mean routine and which ones mean something's gone wrong. Room 203 was at the far end of the south wing, near the windows that overlooked the old courtyard nobody visited anymore. It was Eleanor Mathis's room. She'd been here long before I started. Neat woman, quiet, polite, and always with a cardigan folded just so at the foot of her bed. But lately, there'd been complaints. Not from her. She never raised her voice, but from staff. One of the aides said Eleanor had started talking to herself at night. Not the usual mumbling some residents do, but full-on conversations. Pauses for imaginary replies. Laughter. Pleading. One night, she apparently cried for almost an hour, repeating the same phrase over and over. He needs help. Please, someone help him. The nurses said she was declining. Dementia had a way of turning the past into the present and imagination into fact. They noted it, documented it, and moved on. Still, something fell off. It wasn't just the content of her speech, it was the conviction. She wasn't confused or disoriented when she talked about the boy. She was lucid, calm. She'd say that he visited her every night, that he stood by her bed, hands curled at his sides, looking at her but never touching, and that he always asked the same thing, help me. She claimed she didn't know who he was, said he wore pajamas with little stars on them, and that he always looked sad, lonely even. But when I asked more, she'd grow quiet, like she knew she was saying too much and regretted it. No one took her seriously, but I started jotting down the time she mentioned him. The pattern was unsettling, always after midnight, always for exactly 7 minutes. No more, no less, as if he were on a schedule. I convinced myself it was a coincidence. Then, one night while doing my rounds, I passed by 203 and noticed the door was ajar. Not wide open, just barely cracked, like someone had stepped out for a moment and forgotten to close it behind them. The hall was quiet, too quiet. I paused. Something tugged at me. Not fear, exactly, but that prickling sense you get when you walk into a room and instinctively feel like something's not right. I pushed the door open. Eleanor was sitting up in bed, turned slightly toward the window. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out at first. Just a slow rhythm of breath and motion. As I stepped closer, I could hear it, low whispers like a private conversation held between breaths. She didn't see me, or if she did, she gave no sign. Her gaze was fixed across the room, at the empty corner near the armchair no one ever used. I followed her gaze, fully expecting to see nothing but pale yellow walls and shadow. And that's exactly what I saw. No child, no figure, no trace of anyone or anything. But Eleanor was talking as if someone stood right in front of her. She nodded slightly, then lifted one hand in a trembling gesture, something between a wave and a reach. Her face was soft, not frightened, not confused. It was a look I hadn't seen before, like she was trying to remember something and the memory was just out of reach. I called her name. She flinched. Her eyes snapped to me, wide and glassy. Not afraid, but startled, like I'd interrupted something private. Then, just as quickly, her expression changed. Her hand dropped. She turned her face away and pulled the blanket up around her chest. I didn't ask what she'd been doing. I told myself it wasn't my place. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was a moment of disorientation. Or maybe it was just her way of coping with the long, empty hours between dusk and dawn. Still, I checked the hallway cameras the next day. I told myself I was doing it for documentation, to confirm that Eleanor hadn't been visited by anyone during the night. Security protocol. But I was lying to myself. I needed to know if she had been talking to someone. The footage was uneventful. The timestamp showed her sitting up around 12:03 a.m. She looked toward the far corner and started moving her lips. 7 minutes passed. She lowered her hand, turned away, and lay back down. The room never changed. The shadows didn't move. No one entered or left. No flickering, no enamities. Just a woman whispering into a void. But even through the grainy black and white feed, I could see something that made my skin crawl. Eleanor smiled. Not the empty kind of smile people give out of reflex. It was warm, real, like she'd seen someone she'd missed for a long, long time. I turned off the monitor and went back to work. But all day, I kept thinking about that look on her face. That impossible, heartbreaking smile. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if she wasn't losing her mind? What if the boy was real? What if we just couldn't see him? And worse, what if he was still here, somewhere in the quiet, watching, waiting, just like she said. Every night, you can explain away a lot in a place like this. A whisper in an empty room, a shadow that moves just slightly off cue, a door that swings inward when it should stay shut. You learn to file it all under old buildings and older people. But there was something about the footage that I couldn't shake, something I wasn't supposed to see, something that didn't belong in the real world. It started with the same grainy black and white glow that painted every surveillance frame. Room 203, timestamp 12:03 a.m. Eleanor was sitting upright again, bathed in the soft bloom of her nightlight. Her arms moved slowly, delicately, like she was brushing the hair away from a child's face. Her gaze was fixed at a point low to the ground, near the baseboard heater. Her hands hovered in the air, not quite touching anything, but cradling the space as if it were filled. I told myself she was reliving something, a memory, maybe, but the way her head tilted, the way she nodded and paused between gestures, as if listening, it was more than imagination. It looked real, interactive, deliberate. I paused the video, rewound, watched it again. 7 minutes, just like she'd always said. Her mouth moved with that same soft rhythm, and once, just once, her head snapped to the left like she was startled. It was subtle, but there. The moment I caught it, I felt a slow chill push its way up my spine, one vertebra at a time. I leaned in closer to the monitor. I don't know what I was expecting to see. Maybe a flicker, a blur, some pixelated distortion that could be anything and nothing. Something that would let me dismiss it as a technical glitch. Instead, I saw the curtain shift in the far corner of the room. Just a little. Nobody's. No movement from Eleanor. But the fabric pulled taut and released like someone had brushed past it. That was when I made the mistake of showing the tape to one of the nurses. She watched for exactly 20 seconds before pulling her eyes away. Her face didn't show fear, but something deeper, resignation, maybe. As if she'd been here before. As if this wasn't the first time something unexplainable had slipped through the cracks of Shiver Hill. She told me to stop looking, told me not to ask questions. Said the last person who kept poking around ended up reassigned to overnight janitorial. And that was before they just stopped showing up altogether. She didn't have to say more. I got the message loud and clear. So I stopped talking about it. But I didn't stop watching. Each night after my shift, I'd review the footage from room 203. I started to catalog every movement, every sound, even the changes in Eleanor's posture. She was growing more animated, her eyes brighter, her gestures more expressive. At first it looked like she was just talking to the boy, but soon it seemed more like she was comforting him, like she was being asked to do something, and she was trying to say no. And then, just days later, everything changed. I was doing evening rounds when I heard her. The scream wasn't loud. Not at first. It was muffled, as though she was trying to contain it. A soft, wet sob, rising into something more urgent. I turned the corner and found her door wide open. The night light inside flickered. Not like it was faulty, but like something was passing between it and the wall. Eleanor was sitting upright in bed again. Only this time, she wasn't whispering. She was trembling. Her hands gripped the blanket like it was the only thing anchoring her to the bed. I froze in the doorway. Her eyes were locked on something in the far corner, and this time they weren't kind or confused. They were wide with fear. There was no smile on her face, only the kind of stillness that comes from trying not to provoke something you can't understand. I stepped into the room. She didn't acknowledge me. Her mouth moved, but it was frantic now, pleading. Her body leaned forward like she was being pulled. Then just as quickly as it started, it stopped. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her eyes closed. She slumped back into the pillow and exhaled, long and slow, like a balloon deflating. The tension in the room vanished, but what replaced it was worse. Not fear, but finality. Something had happened. A decision had been made. I checked on her vitals. Normal. Steady. But her skin felt colder than usual. I returned to the desk and watched the tape. Same timestamp, 12:03 a.m., same lighting. But everything about her body language had changed. She wasn't just interacting anymore. She was reacting, flinching, whispering faster. She turned her head sharply at one point, looking toward the hallway, as if she expected someone to come stop it. Then she reached out, not slowly like before. This time her arm jerked upward, like it had been seized. There was a pause, a full minute where she didn't move at all. And then she nodded. One single, sharp nod. The tape ended there. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to reason with myself. Maybe she was hallucinating. Maybe the mind, starved of time and overstimulated by memories, creates its own answers to fill the gaps. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't it, because I'd seen the exact moment she stopped resisting. Whatever she'd been talking to, she wasn't afraid of it at first. But now she was. And the next day, she refused to speak. Not just to me, to anyone. She stopped eating, stopped acknowledging her name. Just lay there, eyes half open, like she was waiting. For what? I didn't know. Only one thing was certain. The boy wasn't asking for help anymore. He was telling her it was time to go. They said she passed peacefully. That's the word they always use. Peacefully. Like it's supposed to mean something more than stillness. As if a quiet death in a place like this wasn't already the expectation. As if a smile frozen on an old woman's lips in the dim half-light of her room meant comfort instead of resignation. Eleanor was gone. 3 days after the incident. 3 days after that last scream. That trembling silhouette. That silent nod into nothing. No more whispers. No more midnight visitors. Just another bed that needed changing and a chart marked with a time of death. They called it natural causes. No autopsy. No questions. Just a soft-voiced nurse removing her personal effects and a maintenance guy rolling her bed down the hall. Like she'd never been there at all. But I needed to see the tape. Getting access wasn't easy this time. I'd already drawn attention once, and the nursing supervisor wasn't keen on employees revisiting death scenes for curiosity's sake. So I waited for a shift change. Waited until the evening staff was too busy passing meds and double-checking fall logs. Then I slid into the security office and pulled up the footage from 2:03. It was time-stamped 11:59 p.m., 4 minutes before the standard window. Eleanor lay perfectly still in bed. For a moment, I thought I had the wrong night. But then, slowly, she began to stir. Not the erratic tossing of someone in pain, but the slow, deliberate movement of someone waking on their own. Someone expecting something. She sat up. Her hair, once meticulously kept, now spilled in soft waves over her shoulders. The night light illuminated her from behind, throwing her face in a shadow, until she turned slightly toward the door. That's when I saw it. The smile. Not wide, not exaggerated, just a soft curve at the corners of her mouth. The kind people were when they're about to greet someone they love but haven't seen in years. Her eyes locked onto something off-screen, near the foot of the bed. Her lips moved slowly, not in the frantic whispering I'd seen before, but in gentle murmurs. The kind you'd offer a frightened child. Then she reached out, both hands extended, palms open, waiting. And then he appeared. I didn't see him enter. The door never moved. No shift in light, no flicker or glitch in the feed. One frame, he wasn't there. The next, he was a child, barely a silhouette, pale and flickering like a projection caught in static. He didn't look directly at the camera. He only had eyes for her. He stood just beyond the edge of her blanket, wearing what looked like pajamas with tiny white stars. His hand, small, trembling, reached up to meet hers. When they touched, the screen bled static for a moment. Just a shimmer of distortion across the image. Then they began to move. Together, Eleanor stood, her frame steadied by something unseen. Her hand never left his. They walked slowly, carefully toward the far corner of the room. They didn't exit through the door. They simply vanished out of frame, as if the camera had forgotten to follow them. I sat frozen, fingers hovering over the keyboard, the silence in the room heavier than before. The feed kept running. The bed was empty. The doors still closed. No one else ever entered. I replayed it 5 times, trying to convince myself I was seeing it wrong. But every time the boy was there, flickering, almost translucent, but unmistakably real. And he looked happy. That was the hardest part to accept. He didn't look like something sinister. There was no menace in his form, no violence in his movements. Just quiet longing. And something else. Recognition. It didn't make sense. Not until I dug into her intake forms. The files were digitized, but most of the older records have been scanned in from ancient yellowed pages, some typed, some handwritten in the faded cursive of long-retired administrators. I skimmed Eleanor's chart. Birth date, medications, next of kin. Standard stuff. But in a psychological intake dated 1998, there was a small addendum scribbled in the margin. No memory of firstborn due to ischemic stroke, 1972. My heart caught in my throat. Firstborn? I scrolled through the rest of the documentation, combed every entry, every physician's note, every family contact. There was no mention of son. No name, no age, no burial plot. It was as if he had been erased from the timeline entirely. Just that one line, as brittle and fragile as a spider's thread. I checked the emergency contacts list. Daughter, Marlene Mathis, now living in Arizona. The daughter visited once a year, always in June. But there were no records of other children, living or deceased. No indication that Eleanor had ever carried another life into the world. Except for that single note. I reached out to records, requesting any archived birth certificates associated with Eleanor's medical history. I received a curt message an hour later. No additional dependents on file. But if the boy wasn't recorded anywhere else, if his name had been forgotten or removed, what did that make him? Not a ghost in the traditional sense. Ghosts linger. They haunt. They rattle dishes and scratch at doors. This was something else entirely. He didn't haunt Eleanor. He waited for her. For decades, maybe, held outside of memory, outside of record, like a photograph shoved into the back of a drawer and left to yellow. A life left behind because the mind simply couldn't carry it anymore. And yet, when the time came, when the mind finally quieted, when whatever wall her brain had built started to crack, he came back, not for revenge, but for reunion. It made me wonder how much of what we forget stays buried. Whether memory is a vault we lock from the inside, or a trapdoor that opens when we least expect it. Whether the dead really ever leave us at all, or just wait in the corners of rooms, whispering, unseen. I shut the laptop and leaned back in my chair. My shift wasn't over yet, but I couldn't stop thinking about that tape, and the soft, deliberate way Eleanor smiled before she took his hand. There's a quiet that follows death here. One that's hard to explain unless you've lived with it. It doesn't rush in. It leaks like a slow fog curling through the baseboards. After Eleanor passed, I thought maybe things would settle. Though what I saw was some unique, unrepeatable fluke tied only to her, an echo of something unfinished. But that was before the others started seeing him too. It began as whispers again, this time from residents who had never spoken much. Men and women whose minds had grown clouded with time began to speak softly at night, just before sleep took hold. Not to us, not to each other, but to someone we couldn't see. One woman, Ruth from 102, was mute for 2 years after a stroke. She began humming lullabies under her breath at 3 a.m. sharp for 3 nights straight. Then she was gone. Peacefully, they said. The same word, the same look on her face, soft, serene, as if death had been something warm that came to take her hand, not something cold that pried it away. I asked to review the footage. I didn't even try to hide my curiosity anymore. I needed to see it. And there he was again, the boy, the same shimmering silhouette, but not quite the same. He was taller now, maybe by an inch, 2 at most. His outline was clearer, the grainy fuzz around him more defined. His clothes had changed, too. The pajama stars were still there, but his sleeves were longer, his face a little fuller. He moved with more certainty, more ease. like he remembered how to walk. And Ruth, she stood without help. She hadn't done that in months. She took his hand. They walked toward the shadowy edge of the room. And then she was simply not there anymore. It happened again the following week with Mr. Geller, the retired dentist in 108. He'd always kept to himself, watching old westerns on mute and chewing peppermint lozenges until his lips turned red. He hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in months. But the day before he died, he pressed his ear to the wall and whispered something, as if listening for a knock on the other side. That night, he smiled in his sleep. The boy came at 12:04 a.m. this time. Each new tape was both a revelation and a burden. I told myself I was keeping a record, a kind of vigil, documenting something nobody else would, something nobody else could. But the more I watched, the more I noticed how wrong things had started to feel. Because the boy wasn't staying the same. Every new appearance, he was growing, not rapidly, but noticeably. He was more solid, more real. His posture changed. His steps grew confident. The way he looked at the residents changed too. He wasn't just sad anymore. There was relief there, maybe even recognition. It was like watching someone wake from a long sleep, one dream at a time. And still, no one outside a dying breath ever mentioned him. Except us, the staff who paid too much attention. And that was becoming dangerous. One of the night nurses, Cynthia, had noticed the pattern too. We talked in hushed tones during the crossover between shifts. We agreed not to tell anyone else. Not because it was a secret, but because it felt like something that wanted to stay hidden. Like speaking of it aloud might make it stronger, or worse, bring it closer. She watched the tape from Ruth's room once, and she quit the next day. Left her badge, her shoes, and even her thermos in the break room fridge. No call, no goodbye. The supervisor said she'd been struggling lately, that maybe it was burnout. That happens in this line of work. But I saw the way Cynthia looked after she watched that video. The way her hands shook slightly, as if something inside her had been pulled out, examined, and not quite put back right. Then Melanie disappeared. She worked day shifts, mostly paperwork and transport. No connection to the tapes. Never talked about Eleanor or Geller or Ruth. But she started staying late, quietly slipping into the security room during off hours, sometimes with her phone pressed close to the monitors like she was trying to record something. One morning, she just didn't show up. Her locker was still sealed when I passed it 3 days later. Nobody had touched it. Her favorite pen was still clipped to her notes. Her cup sat by the time clock, half full. No word from her since. The supervisor chalked it up to a personal emergency. I didn't ask. I already knew. Something was happening. Something none of us could fully name. The boy, whatever he was changing. And the more people he visited, the more real he became. It was almost like the act of being remembered, of being seen, was drawing him back piece by piece. As if each hand he held, each soul he walked into the dark with, was giving something back to him in return. A fraction of memory, a face, a voice, a name. But that was the thing. We still didn't know his name. There were no records. I searched every file, dug through boxes in the back office. Even the oldest paper charts didn't mention a child that matched his shape, his time, his presence. No one had filed a death notice. No incident report. Not even a whisper of a lost patient. He was just there, in the gaps, filling spaces we didn't know were empty until he stood in them. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening at night, when everything had gone still, when the building held its breath. I'd strain my ears, wondering if I could hear the soft shuffle of little feet, the hush of fabric brushing against the linoleum. But it never came. He didn't appear unless someone was ready. And only the dying ever truly saw him. The rest of us? We were just the observers. Witnesses standing at the edge of something we didn't understand, watching it grow teeth and eyes and meaning. Something about that terrified me. Not the boy, not even the deaths. It was the sense that we were helping him come back. Not by inviting him, not even consciously, but by watching. Every time we saw him and acknowledged him. Every time we whispered about him behind the nurse's station or sat in front of grainy footage with our hands tied in our laps, we were giving him shape. Memory has power, especially the kind that's been buried. And now I couldn't stop wondering, how many people had forgotten him? How many still would? The boy had made his way into my dreams. Not in the way nightmares do. Not with claws or whispers or twisted shapes, but in quiet ways. Subtle ways. I'd wake up with the feeling that someone had been standing just outside my periphery, watching. Not malevolent. Not even sad. Just waiting. I couldn't focus on anything anymore. Not during med passes. Not during audits. Not even during the slow stretches between vitals and meal rounds. I started seeing shapes in corners. Just flickers. Really? Movement where there shouldn't be any. No one else noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say a word. People were careful now. Cautious. Eyes down, mouth shut. But I needed answers. And I did something reckless. I brought in an old photo album. It wasn't even a conscious choice. Not really. Just something I found while cleaning the attic at home. A dusty relic from childhood tucked between boxes of holiday decorations and tax returns. I hadn't flipped through it in years. But that night, I brought it to work. Left it in my locker until the final round. Then took it out under the soft hum of the break room light. The photos were what you'd expect. Birthdays. Halloween costumes. A beach trip. A series of Christmas mornings with me in increasingly awkward sweaters. Familiar faces, parents, neighbors, the dog we lost when I was 12. But in the middle of one page, somewhere between a birthday card and a faded drawing of a stick figure family, was something I couldn't explain. A photo of two children, me, unmistakably, and a boy standing beside me. Roughly the same height, maybe 6 years old. Same awkward haircut, same missing tooth. But I didn't recognize him. He had his arm around my shoulder. We were smiling, genuinely smiling. Not the forced kind you give a parent with a camera. This was comfortable, familiar, like we knew each other. Beneath the photo, in handwriting I knew belonged to my mother, was a short note. You and Charlie, 1996. I stared at it for a long time. Charlie? I was an only child. I'd always been an only child. Hadn't I? I flipped back through the album, searching for more evidence. And I found it. Notes and margins, cards with "to both of you" scribbled in looping cursive. Photos of 2 sets of toys. 2 slices of cake. 1 blue candle, 1 red. Always together. Always 2. But none of it made sense. There was no memory. None. Just a blank space where something should have lived. And that terrified me more than anything. Because if something so foundational, so formative, could be forgotten, what else had been erased? That night, I stayed late again. I walked the halls long after everyone else had gone quiet, the way I'd done a dozen times before. I passed the rooms of the recently passed. Empty beds, new sheets, untouched air. I paused at Eleanor's door, then Geller's, then Ruth's. Each one dark, silent, but not unoccupied. Not really. I could feel him. I told myself I wouldn't look at the tapes anymore, that it had become an obsession, that I was seeing things that weren't there. But I knew it was too late. He was already with me. And then, sometime after 2 a.m., I saw him. Not on the monitor, not in a reflection, in the hallway. He didn't appear with a flicker. There was no distortion, no chill in the air, no warning. He was just standing there, with the moonlight from the window poured across the linoleum. Small, still, real. His face wasn't as grainy now. The edges of him no longer shimmered. He was solid, entire. His eyes found mine, and there was no fear in them. He didn't ask for help this time. He said one word. Not aloud, but I felt it. Remember. And suddenly I did. Not all at once. Not like a door opening. More like a wall buckling, slowly. Cracks forming. The rush of memory pushing through in fragments. A voice calling my name from across the yard. A fight over a toy. A shared blanket on stormy nights. The way he laughed. Loud and free and unself-conscious. The way he cried when the cat died. The scar on his knee. The way we held hands in the back seat during long road trips. His name wasn't just a name. It was part of me, woven through every story I'd forgotten I ever lived. Charlie, my brother, gone before his 7th birthday. A fever that turned into seizures. A hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and sunless afternoons. The cold silence in the car ride home. And then, nothing. No grave. No photos on the walls. No Minschen. My parents never said his name again. And I, being small, followed suit. A child's mind doesn't challenge silence. It absorbs it. It learns to skip over the missing page. But now I remembered. All of it. He stood in front of me, and I wasn't afraid. The sadness I'd always carried, that quiet ache I'd never been able to name, it bloomed into something sharp and beautiful and full. He had never left me. He had just been waiting for someone to remember. And now that I had, he smiled. He didn't move toward me, didn't take my hand. That wasn't what he needed anymore. I had given him back his name. That was enough. And then, like mist burned away by morning light, he was gone. No fanfare, no bouvier, just absence where a presence had been. But it wasn't empty. Not anymore. I returned to my locker and placed the photo back into the album. The ink beneath the names no longer looked unfamiliar. It was proof, a confirmation that I hadn't made him up, that he had been, that he was. And now, when I walk the halls of Shiver Hill and someone whispers in the night, I don't listen for footsteps. I don't search the corners of the rooms for flickers. I wait for the moment someone remembers, because that's when he comes, not to haunt, but to guide. And if no one remembers them, those who came before, they fade. But if someone does, they walk out together, hand in hand, like we did once when I was a child.